Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today we're going to take a look at the International Labor Organization to see what it's doing to help promote labor standards and create employment in many areas of the world, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean. My guest today is an expert on this agency and on these issues. My guest today is Mr. Vinícius Pinheiro. Mr. Pinheiro is a Brazilian national who was recently appointed the International Labor Organization's Director of the Latin American and Caribbean region. Mr. Vinícius Pinheiro, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you so much, Bill. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
It's been a while since we've done this, and yes. I'm glad we caught you. You're just about ready to leave town to take on a new assignment. Congratulations on that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Just to jog our memories here, let's talk a little bit about the ILO, just a little overview of it, and then we'll get into Latin America and the Caribbean. What is the United Nations International Labor Organization? It was created in 1919. What's its main mission?
Yeah, absolutely. So, by the way, we are commemorating 100 years.
Yes, happy birthday.
Yes, thank you so much. So, 2019 has been quite hectic for us because we are marking all the achievements of the ILO from the past, but also we are looking at the future, how the future of work will be shaped. So, it was a very intense year for us. But when we were created in 1919, it was just after the World War I. Actually, ILO is part of the Versailles Treaty. There was this perception that if you want to have peace, sustainable peace, you need to cultivate social justice. So during those times, I mean, people worked 6 hours a week, 8 hours a week. Children working. It was just post, slavery, but slavery was still present. So there was this perception that we need to regulate labor, because labor is not a commodity. We shouldn't try to treat people like cotton or beans, because these are people that have families, and if you want a society to prosper, you need to invest in social justice. So that was the motto of the ILO in the early years, and now this mandate is translated in the word of decent work. ILO, our vision is to that everybody that would like to have a job should find a decent job. That's what we want for the world.
So decent work for everybody.
Yes,
everybody should be included.
For all.
Exactly, for all. That's for sure. Well, our viewers can go to your website, www.ilo.org. Now, you have 4 pillars that you developed in 1919, are still very, very viable today. Briefly, what are those 4 pillars?
Yeah, absolutely. This is pretty much the definition of decent work. So it's employment, so decent employment with decent work conditions, a decent a living wage, good conditions of health, safety at work. So this is employment. The second, social protection. Now, everybody that should be protected against adversities related to the work or outside the work. That means pensions and maternity benefits and sick benefits, all types of retirements. Social dialogue is a very important part of the ILO because we are the only institution in the United Nations that is tripartite. That means in our governance we have workers, employers, and governments, and they should get together and decide precisely on the 4th pillar, which is the international labor standards. So if you want to operate at the global level in terms of movements of capital, movements of people, we should agree a minimum floor of labor standards. So that's the main role of the ILO since its creation. Now we have more than 200 conventions that were adopted. The latest one, by the way, is the one on violence and harassment at work, which is quite linked to the Me Too movement. So commemorating its centenary here has been quite an experience, in particular because we are showing our relevance as much as ever.
Now, the ILO has had many publications in the past. You've done research projects, reports, just a wide range of informational pieces that are, most of them I'm sure are on your website. But as I recall, a couple of years ago you did the one on the decent work agenda. What exactly is that decent work agenda?
Yeah, so precisely, the decent work combined these 4 pillars that I just mentioned. So employment, social protection, labor standards, and social dialogue and tripartism. So these are the 4, let's say, pillars of decent work. And basically, everybody should that's looking for a job should have a job that pays fairly, that guarantees a level of social protection that is organized under respecting freedoms, including under the assumption of no discrimination, and also a job that is regulated, by labor standards.
Well, it covers a wide range of issues. You deal with everything: climate change, human trafficking, labor standards, just on across the board. But let's focus in, put the spotlight on one particular area, or two if you want to include them as separate: Latin America and the Caribbean, where you're going to be focusing your attention in the future. What do you see as some of the major challenges that are occurring in Latin America? There have been a lot of positive things that have happened, but there are challenges. We saw the Amazon caught on fire. The rainforests normally don't catch on fire. That's not the way it's supposed to work. We've seen social unrest in Chile. I think, as I read about it, it's caused primarily by income inequality. We see that there are other challenges that are happening. What do you view as some of the major challenges that you'll be dealing with as a representative of the International Labor Organization? And we can talk about some of the strategies to help the people in that area.
Absolutely. The Amazon on fire definitely is a big issue. But beyond that, I think we need to look at what's happening with the society. Society is on fire.
Right.
If you see societies that were relatively stable, like, for example, Chile was always a kind of a middle-income, rich country with a sustainable economic growth over years. They're still on social unrest. So basically, they're burning everything, and this goes from Chile. There are some countries such as Bolivia, for example. We talk about climate change. So which is the group that is most vulnerable to climate change? Indigenous peoples. But in Bolivia, they went to street to protest against the elimination of the fossil fuel subsidies because they're addicted to oil. So all these contradictions are so important. Of course, Venezuela is a crisis and a migration and refugee crisis that's bigger than the Syrian crisis, and people are not paying enough attention to that, and the level of destabilization that this can provoke in the region. You see Colombia as well. Colombia just erupted. The social movement just erupted last week, so it's like a volcano being, And what are they talking about? If you just look at what they're saying, in the signs, you see social justice. So they want social justice. They want jobs, in particular young people. They want pensions. So in some countries that privatize pension schemes in Latin America, now the pension funds are paying off, and the value of the pension is just miserable because, first, interest rates are so bad now, and second, they didn't survive to the crisis, to the economic crisis. They didn't have time to recover, So all these things are kind of erupting. And sometimes it takes a little, increase of 80 cents in a metro card, for example, to burn the fire. So this is what we are worried about in Latin America, how to address these very fundamental structural issues that the region is facing.
And this is a very serious problem. As you mentioned, people are addicted to oil. They're addicted to fossil fuels, let's say coal, oil, natural gas, whatever. And we all want employment. We want employment opportunities, but by the same token, and we're running into the same problem in the United States and Poland, other areas of the world, where you have miners who want to work, but the fuel that they're producing is helping to destroy the planet. So what do we do with them? How do we, as the explanations go in the United States and other areas, we need to develop alternative forms of employment. And there are a lot of good jobs out there that are not dangerous and don't give you black lung the way being a coal miner might. But, for example, the solar field. That's one of the largest growth areas in the United States and many countries around the world. But what types of alternative employment can we create or help create? We can't do it single-handedly.
Absolutely. This is very appropriate that you're talking about this because the COP is just starting in Madrid this week, right?
Climate Change Conference,
the Climate Change Conference
25 in
COP
Madrid,
25.
Spain.
Exactly.
Yes.
So sometimes we hear this narrative that you're not going to curb emissions or be part of the Paris Agreement because this will limit economic growth. So this is a kind of narrative of people lose the jobs. We're gonna. And what we have shown in our studies, it's actually a false dilemma There is no, trade-off between transitioning to a more sustainable economy and creating jobs. On the contrary, the low carbon economy, the low carbon industry, is more job intensive than the fossil fuel. That means, for example, if you transition from oil or from mining to solar panels, the solar panels needs more people than mining. Particularly now, mining is becoming very automatized, and also the oil industry. Right? So basically, in not only, of course, in the plants, but also across the entire supply chain. So the low carbon economy is more job intensive. So the transition towards a more sustainable, let's say, economy actually will have a positive net impact on the jobs, on job creation. But now it's important to also to know that some people will lose their jobs, and we need a kind of social protection system that will kind of absorb the impact of this layoffs, and also retrain them to move to other sources. And also, for example, we can't just cut fossil fuel subsidies like this, because economies and societies and small villages, they're addicted to it. Now, so we, sometimes some countries are doing what they're doing. Okay, we are phasing out fossil fuel, but then we give you a minimum pension, or something for the family, so they can compensate, that increase in the price of gas, right? So there are smart ways to do it. So that's what we should, think about in Latin America as well.
Exactly, and we have to do it. We have to do it. We have no choice because
exactly,
we will be dealing with climate change either today,
and
it'll be a lot worse tomorrow, and it'll be much more expensive and more painful.
Exactly.
That's the thing that people, I think, are starting to get the impression they're understanding that now. But there's been so much disinformation put out by the fossil fuel companies, ExxonMobil, BP, different ones like that. They have put out false reports. They hire pseudoscientists, and they really muddy the waters and talk about how this is just a normal cyclical event.
You're saying that, right?
I'm saying it. You're not saying it. That's right. And scientists are saying it too.
Scientists.
That's right.
I just say,
but
for example,
we do need to focus on the scientific evidence.
No, absolutely. And also, even you started by mentioning the fires in the Amazon, right? Even on this particular region, of course, there are millions of people living there, right? So what should they do? We can't just ask them to go back to the jungle and collect, fruits and stuff. They have to, but there's sustainable activities that they can engage with. So there are, from tourism to all other types of productions, there are ways that you can at the same time generate economic growth and generate a good living standards for this population, because they have the right to do that, have the right to be brought to the, at the same time preserving the forest and preserving the environment. So, and there are ways to do that. So that's one of our main points about green jobs, about generating green jobs.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a website, you have a computer, you like our shows and you want to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided as a public service at no cost to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today we're talking about a wide range of issues, from climate change to human trafficking to artificial intelligence and many other areas around the world, but also in one particular area, and that is in Latin America and the Caribbean. And my guest is an expert on these topics and on the International Labor Organization. My guest today is Mr. Vinícius Pinheiro, and Mr. Pinheiro is the newly appointed director of the International Labor Organization's Latin American and Caribbean region. These points that you're bringing out are so important. And one, before I move away from the climate change, seems like climate change just touches all of our lives and we can't get away from it. But the studies have shown, and you can see it visually, you don't need a study to see it, that the glaciers are disappearing. They're disappearing all around the world. And the indigenous peoples in Bolivia, living on the Altiplano, in certain Andean countries, their glaciers will be gone within 15 to 20, 30 years. What will happen to those people because they can't pipe water up from La Paz to the Altiplano. I don't think. Maybe they can. But what will happen when you talk about social unrest if you have large outmigrations of people, and we see it now, climate change refugees, but what will happen in that situation?
No, definitely. I mean, in particular, indigenous peoples, but also rural communities in general, they are among the most vulnerable people to climate change, and among the least, the group that have least contributed to climate change in terms of emissions. And the same applies to the islands in the Caribbean. Yeah? So the contribution to the total emissions is like
zero.
It's zero.
That's right.
And they're the ones, suffering the increase in the storms, in hurricanes, and also flooding. So there's a kind of imbalance. It's kind of unfair, the way that climate change is affecting people compared to the way that people have contributed to climate change. And definitely there are regions in Latin America, but in the rest of the world, such as Bolivia as well, but also I would say some areas in Peru, and of course the Caribbean, that will suffer, well, even Chile, they will suffer from big draws as well. And everything's connected as well with the temperature of the sea, because at the same time you got the El Nino that starts provoking, that connects with the entire ecosystem in the region, including also the fauna. So it's a big challenge for the entire region, and of course you have to address it, the structural cause, before you do anything.
And we're into an interlocking ecological system. Yeah. And all parts interact with the other parts, and when certain parts change, that can really alter the overall operation of the ecosystem. Well, you, with the International Labor Organization, we were talking about climate change and creating gainful employment, decent work for people and that type of thing, helping to create alternative jobs, maybe getting people out of being coal miners or mining for fossil fuels, whatever the case might be. But you're also into areas like human trafficking. You've done a lot of work on that. How, when you move into your position, how will the ILO come in to work with the governments? Well, you mentioned the tripartite groups, labor, the governments, and the workers. The businesses. How will you work with them to try to focus the spotlight on these issues like climate change, human trafficking, artificial intelligence, just on across the board that you have studied? You folks have done an excellent job studying this over the last 100 years, really. So how do you do that?
No, absolutely. So in particular, if you look at Latin America, it's a region where various worlds that coexist. So we have the 19th century still there with human trafficking, modern slavery, a lot of child labor, and you have the 21st century with artificial intelligence, robots, and a huge mechanization and automation of processes. So how to reconcile these two worlds? And this has to be together, done together, as you said, with business, with the workers. So of course, on the trafficking and modern slavery, and in particular child labor. So first we need to of course, governments, they have an obligation to enhance, labor inspection and to enforce legislation, including by using the latest technologies to do that. Now you can, for example, use satellite imagery and AI to identify slots where you can possibly find child labor, for example, forced labor in the middle of the Amazon. So the Brazilians, for example, are doing that, bringing the latest, developments in IT to address these issues. And business, they have a core responsibility, not only to look at what's happening within their own fabric, but also across the supply chains. So that's why more and more businesses are moving towards kind of fair trade certification, or are looking, using technology as well to look at, to monitor, to track progress in their supply chain, to check whether there's any evidence or any, because it's not only a matter of course, human rights and labor rights, but also is a matter of brand for them. So if they are caught in one of these situations, they can just ruin their business. And some countries, for example, UK and now California as well, they have passed acts in which companies that are caught on child labor, forced labor, they cannot commercialize, not trading within the territory, within the UK, within the California. So this is coming very strongly. On the other side, the future of work, right? So what's going to happen to jobs? And then again, if you look at the narrative, you have sometimes this combination between what I call the robocalypse now, which is it's a apocalypse now with a Robocop
with
together.
Robocop.
It's like
Okay.
robots will take over and will destroy all the jobs, and the world will be, so I don't buy this very much, and because what's happening is, of course, there's a lot of substitution happening, but not within. But what's happening is happening within each job. For example, if you put a matrix like a number of tasks and tasks that are automated, right? So what happens is some of the tasks within each job, they will be automated to a certain level. For example, let's say a journalist. So let's say in 20 or 10 years' time, there will be 50% automation. So that means that this 50% time that you gain, you'll be liberated to do other things and to think about other, issues. So it's not true that jobs will disappear completely, but it's true that jobs will change. So to keep pace of this change, it's very, very important that governments, workers and employers, business, they work together to alleviate the transitions, to look at how to upskill the labor force. Upskilling, is going to be a major challenge for the future. In the same way, for the future, we need to prepare ourselves. Like a day a week or be on training. Otherwise, you can't keep, So
Exactly.
that will change a lot. The way that we work, the way that we connect individuals and companies, and connect company and society and individuals.
There's another term that you mentioned earlier, and we've been using more so lately, is income inequality. And years ago, people talked about income inequality. I was look at Latin America. There you have all the oligarchs. You have them getting most of the money, most of the power, and you have few people, the majority of the people, with a very small amount. But that's changed in the United States alone. Just as one example, we see that the income inequality is a major, major problem. How severe do you think this is going to be in the future? And we're looking at some of these, the spin-offs or ramifications of it, like, and you mentioned Chile. There was an example where income inequality, I think, probably contributed to most of that social unrest. But how important is that to focus attention on it and try to rectify it and to maybe level it out a little more than what it is?
Yeah, we have a lot of studies showing that income inequality is fully correlated, associated with social unrest. And the one author that I think did it quite well, I don't know if you know Albert Hirschman, he's an economist. He used this image of the tunnel. Imagine yourself stuck in the tunnel with your car, and then you got a number of lines. If you're stuck in your car, of course you're unhappy and everybody's stuck. But if you see the line of your neighbor moving and you're stuck, so that's
Right.
what income inequality causes to people. So that's what triggers. If everybody's like stuck in the same low level, okay, you kind of accept. But if you see your neighbor growing up with the same conditions, so that's when it can affect your social contract, let's say. And there are a number of course, Latin America is still very persistent inequality. Some countries, they leave it a little bit, but now it's coming back. And it has structural causes. But income inequality is increasing here in the West and also in Europe. And this has to do with globalization, with the financialization of the economy, and also with technology. And the way people are gaining from the distribution of the wealth related to the technology. So we really need to do something to address this type of issues. Even the number of billionaires, if you see what happened in the number of billionaires, when in the past to be a millionaire was something, the old US industrialists, they were millionaires. Now you see what's happening to the world, It's something that needs to be done, and it has to do with tax systems,
Right.
social protection, wages. Yeah, so that's how we distribute. The distribution machine is so who, in the end of the day, gets what, right?
That's very, very true. And if you think back to the 50s, more so after World War II, that there was upward mobility. And that's what helped create the middle class, the middle socioeconomic elements in not just the United States, but many other countries around the world, especially in Europe and well, Latin America too, to a large degree. And you see today that there's an attack on labor unions, trade unions, a weakening of those. They were very prominent in helping to eliminate child slavery, children working for small amounts of money, kids working in factories. And so those were issues that were dealt with back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and now they're coming back today. But the International Labor Organization has done a remarkable job focusing on this, and I think it's going to be fascinating to hear from you in the future as to how things are developing in Latin America and the Caribbean. But Mr. Vinícius Pinheiro, I want to thank you so very much,
thank you so much
for
Bill.
a very interesting and very informative program.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.